Good evening. Good evening, and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. My name is Miyu Kumakura. I am a sophomore studying government at the college, and I'm a member of the JFK Jr. Forum Committee here at the Institute of Politics. Before we begin, please note the exit doors, which are located on both the park side, over here, and the JFK Street side of the forum. In the event of an emergency, walk to the exit closest to you and congregate in the JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones. You can join the conversation tonight online by tweeting with the hashtag JFK Junior Forum Live, which is also listed in your program. Please take your seats now and join me in welcoming our guests, Mark Leibovich, Leah Wright Rigueur, Chris Robichaud, and Director of the Institute of Politics, Mark D. Guerin.
Great job. Thank you, Miyu. Oh, I got my set. Thank you. Thank you, Miyu, for the introduction, and welcome. Good evening, and welcome to the first JFK Junior Forum of the spring semester. We warmly welcome all of you here. It's a perfect timing, pre-Super Bowl, to engage in a little conversation about football. And we invite you during the course of the semester to come back to the forum, where we will address various topics. On the back of your program are listed some of the upcoming forums, starting tomorrow evening with the faith leaders on moral resistance, on next Tuesday with our new group of IOP fellows that will be here addressing their interests, and following up next week with Ambassador Caroline Kennedy and Senator Ed Markey, talking about domestic politics, foreign politics, and like. So it's all there before you, including a session on artificial intelligence, so we warmly welcome you back. But tonight we're very fortunate to have Mark Leibovich here in a moderated conversation with two colleagues here from the Kennedy School. Mark is well known to us from those here in Boston, having grown up here in nearby Newton, Massachusetts, but brings to this conversation his perspective currently in his role with the New York Times Magazine, but having been in the Washington Bureau of the New York Times and covered the presidential campaigns in 2008 and 2012 in the Obama administration. And now, of course, with the release of his well-received new book, Big Game, The NFL in Dangerous Times in This Town. So he has changed the focus for the creation of this book, production of this book, and we warmly welcome Mark back to Boston for this conversation. It's well moderated tonight by Assistant Professor Leah Wright Rigueur, who is Assistant Professor here of Public Policy. In her research here at the Kennedy School involves 20th century political and social history, modern African-American history, and her work emphasizes race, civil rights, and political ideology. So we thank you, Leah, for co-moderating with Chris Robichaud, who's a senior lecturer in ethics and public policy. We'll bring his perspective from his work in the role of truth and well-functioning democracies. All well-adjusted now for your mics. I think we're all ready to go. All football fans, and tonight we're all Patriots fans, aren't we all here as we... So, Mark, welcome back. Chris, thank you for doing it. We'll turn it over to Leah. Thank you all for joining us.
Yeah. So thank you all for joining us here tonight, and thank you, Mark, so much for braving the polar vortex to come out to Cambridge tonight. So I think it'll be a really interesting and hopefully provocative conversation. But I thought we'd start off just a little bit by talking about your book. And I'm really interested in where this book comes from. Why'd you write it? And why this, shift away from kind of electoral politics into, sports politics of all things?
Well, that wasn't the intent. The intent wasn't the sports politics part. I mean, essentially, I've been covering national politics for about 20 years, and after the last campaign, I needed a break from politics. So what better place to take a break from politics than into the NFL during the Trump years, right? So that didn't work out terribly well. But, I mean, football has been a great passion of mine for a long time. I'd written a magazine story on Tom Brady in 2015, and then the NFL commissioner, Roger Goodell, in 2016. So I sort of had an annual side project of just one big magazine story a year on NFL figures, and that sort of indicated to me that there was a lot more to that world that I wanted to get to know. And I also just, there was not a great sort of body of literature of sort of honest writing about the NFL. There's a lot of sort of glorification, a lot of insider sort of accounts, but this was more of an outsider account that, frankly, gave away some secret handshakes and caused some discomfort within the league, which I was happy to do. So it just felt like an adventure, and here we are. So it turns out it was not the escape from politics I thought, but it worked out anyway. So
I thought we'd get into some of those politics, right? So I'm a Patriots fan, but also a Cleveland sports fan, born and raised in Cleveland. When it comes to football, it's been the best of times and the worst of times for me for 20-some years. Go Browns!
When were the
Thank
best?
you. Yeah.
When were the best?
But as a Cleveland fan, LeBron James holds a special place in our town's heart. I think savior might be the actual role that he plays. And recently, he decided to wade in to the controversies surrounding the NFL, and either tweeted or on record said that he had a view of NFL ownership, and he said there's a kind of slave mentality behind the ownership these days. So that was very powerful that he said that, and it certainly was discussed widely. And I thought we would just get into some of this. Like, what would spur, in your views? Like, is he onto something? And what does it also say that you have sports figures and celebrities like LeBron James who feel compelled that they have to speak to this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on there. I mean, I think first of all, Cleveland specifically, it hosted the Republican convention when Donald Trump was nominated in 2016, and I spent a little time in Cleveland. Off and on for a number of years, and I know the basic contours of the history of the Browns and the Cavaliers and the Indians and so forth. And that was a convention that a lot of people were dreading and worried about. There was talk of like protests and riots and like all kinds of added security because Donald Trump is about to be nominated by one of our two major parties. And I remember getting to Cleveland, and with all due respect to Cleveland, this was not one of the sort of marquee sort of cities that you would sort of.
You're hurting me right now.
No, look, Cleveland was a great place to have a convention, and the single biggest reason was that about 3 or 4 weeks earlier, the Cavaliers had won that championship, and I had never really seen that palpably how sports can have this positive effect on a community and people feeling so good about themselves in an environment that was so divisive otherwise, at a moment for the country that was one of the most divisive elections I can remember. So so I actually ever since then have had this incredible warm spot for Cleveland, and also had a more personal appreciation for the LeBron James story and sort of the Cleveland sports story. So that's not pandering, but it's actually true. But look, LeBron James, he mentioned, he used the word slave mentality. That's a word and that's a idea that has been used privately in the NFL for many, many, many years, both by a lot of African-American players, but also from the owner's side. There is a famous, somewhat infamous quote uttered by Tex Schramm, who was the longtime sort of CEO or sort of head of the Dallas Cowboys, who during a union negotiation with Gene Upshaw, who was the head of the NFL Players Association then, he was African-American, he was a Hall of Fame lineman for the Oakland Raiders. Tex Schramm said, "Hey, you know what? We're the ranchers. You're the cattle." Okay, so that quote, which has been repeated many, many times, goes very much to what Gene Upshaw called the plantation mentality of a sport in which every single one of the 32 billionaire owners, except for one, is a white, almost entirely male. 80% of the workforce is African American. The only sport without guaranteed contracts, and there is a sense, as LeBron James certainly picked up on, that this is a sport that is not as progressive or as tolerant of political views of players being outspoken as they would be in the NBA. And I think that gave voice to it in a way that, because it was LeBron James, got a great deal of traction. And I'm sure people, got their backs up, but I think he spoke a truth to a lot of people in both the NFL and in the NBA.
So I think that is a pretty nice segue into probably one of the most controversial topics around the NFL, which is Colin Kaepernick and his experience in the NFL. We're really, I think, interested in hearing a little bit more about your interpretation of Colin Kaepernick, whether it's his experience on the football field, how he's then been treated in the NFL, the process that he's going through right now, and in particular, I'm also wondering if 10 years ago, if this is something that would have been a thing. And I specifically think, or if it's something also that's unique to, say, Colin Kaepernick or to, Eric Reid or something like that. Yeah. I mean, you have somebody like Marshawn Lynch, who, by his own, confession, has been sitting for the national anthem for the past 12 years. Correct. Yeah. And nobody has had anything to say about that. But so I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in addition to everything, I mean, all the dynamics involved, I mean, Colin Kaepernick is an example of what happens when Donald Trump, finds a divisive issue and jumps right into the middle of it and decides to, just heighten the divisiveness and make it the issue that he did. Because without Donald Trump, I mean, you'll remember when Colin Kaepernick started his protest during the national anthem in 2016, it was certainly noticed, and it was controversial, and there were sort of there were a lot of people voicing dissatisfaction and great upset over this, but it was sort of contained. There were maybe about a dozen players around the league, and I think one thing I've found about football is that people's attention does want to somehow default back to the field, and until Donald Trump made it an inescapable issue and made it, I mean, I guess in the words of Arthur Blank, who owns the Falcons, sort of a manhood issue. He made it an issue in which NFL players felt they had to respond to Donald Trump, who was calling them SOBs. And, it just sort of forced out into the open this incredibly uncomfortable conversation, but I think an overdue conversation inside the league. But I do think that, look, Colin Kaepernick, for better or for worse, and I think for worse is that he should be playing quarterback in the NFL somewhere. I think most people would agree with that in different circumstances. For better, I think his place in history is assured, for whatever that's worth. But I also think that he has, if you want to, in an activist context, raise awareness for things that you're passionate about and issues that you think are important, I mean, he's done that. So in some weird kind of perverse way, maybe he has benefited from the perhaps demagogic use that Donald Trump has made of this issue.
So just quick follow-up question, do you think that he, through his actions, through his protests, that he's influenced the league? Do you think he's influenced the owners, the players, maybe even
Yeah, I think there's no question about it. I mean, I think this is not a group of people in charge of the National Football League and who own the National Football League that is willing to, that is in any great hurry to change. I mean, the status quo has worked really, really well for the NFL for a long, long time. I mean, there was this moment in Big Game where at the height of the crisis when Trump spoke up in Alabama, and there were hundreds of players kneeling before or during the national anthem in 2017, where Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the league, called this emergency meeting of a bunch of players and a bunch of owners to meet in New York to discuss what to do next. How do we get through this crisis? And one of the participants in the meeting was nice enough to audio tape or tape the event and share it with me and a colleague, Ken Belson, and that's all in one of the chapters in the book, so everyone should read the book. But one takeaway from that was just how utterly clueless and how utterly scared the owners were of just doing anything that would trigger Donald Trump or trigger their fans. Because, I mean, the NFL, they just want people to watch football. And they're very much of the stick to sports kind of sensibility and attitude. And frankly, a lot of players were insisting that they actually have a greater social consciousness. So.
I guess I want to follow up on this too, because invite you to dig a little deeper into just how much change we're seeing in ownership. You mentioned it, but maybe say more. Yeah. Colin Kaepernick hasn't been signed, and it certainly hasn't been the case that there haven't been plenty of teams. The Browns, until this year, among them, that could have used a quarterback of his stature.
Yeah.
And in addition, if I'm remembering correctly, like before the season this year, ownership signed off on a policy on where they would stand when it came to kneeling or sitting that went over horribly. Is there any learning going on, or I mean,
these are not learning people by and large, to be honest with you. I mean, the league, committed $80 million to social justice programs across the league, to their credit, and I guess that has done well. And there are a lot of players on a number of teams. I mean, Devin McCourty, Matthew Slater on the Patriots have been very, very active in the communities and in some criminal reform measures, and the league has put some money behind it. But the fact is, I think the league is mostly just thrilled that this issue has not gone away, but it's an issue that President Trump has ignored this year. He's moved on to shutdowns and midterm elections and things that have sort of taken his attention away. But no, I mean, look, this is a league that only responds to some kind of pressure, and in that regard, Colin Kaepernick created the first ripple of what became enough of a critical mass of pressure to enact some change. So, they are still a long way away from the NBA and other sports leagues, frankly, and sort of being at the cutting edge of this.
So I'm also curious, especially since we're coming up in the Super Bowl. There's been a lot of conversation about Super Bowl performance in the Super Bowl, but then also, of course, we know this kind of the spectacle of the halftime show. Right. And so, as artists have been announced, we've seen this kind of major celebrity boycott of the Super Bowl. We've also seen a couple of artists, I believe, including like Gladys Knight and Travis Scott, black artists, who have signed on to be met with kind of an immediate backlash. And so part of what's happening right now, they're getting backlash, but they're also getting applause from different quarters for saying, thanks for having thanks for taking the stage.
Yeah.
So it seems like, it's tapping into something, both, something that is representative of football, but something that feels bigger than football, or maybe it's a reflection of just how big football is and how political it is.
It is, and in some ways this very much mimics the culture war. I mean, this is a very coastal sort of celebrity, East Coast, West Coast kind of elite sort of thing that Donald Trump would campaign against. And in some ways the culture war that erupted in football around kneeling, around people who think that the game is too violent, maybe elites on the coast, whether you're an entertainment executive or a suburban parent or a someone in the media or something like that. You are, maybe you're considered just one of these elites who is not going to, understand the heartland sensibility that makes people go out on a Friday night and to watch high school football in Texas or Pennsylvania. In the same way that Donald Trump would speak to these same people and say, look, they don't understand you, they have contempt for you. And Donald Trump, you just would say that the people who are not performing at the Super Bowl are the people who have disdain for football. They have disdain for you, America. And what I think that the lesson there, though, is, you sort of have to choose a side at this point. Nike had a very controversial decision early in the year when they said, you know what, we're actually going to pick a side. Colin Kaepernick is going to be the head of our marketing campaign this year. And Trump immediately took after them. There was talk that their stock was going to tank. I remember this because it's the day the book came out, and I got questions about this and Trump for minutes all week. So there was no football talk whatsoever. But, after 2 days of, his stock took a hit. Nike has had like explosive revenues, and they sort of decided that they want to be on the side of the divide in America that is, that identifies with Colin Kaepernick. And they made the determination that these are the wealthier, better educated, younger, more diverse slice of America that is a better sort of horse to bet on than the Trump America. Now, it's obviously not that binary, but look, it's shown that, it's been proven to be, over the last 5-6 months, a really, really successful business decision by Nike's part. And I don't think, I wouldn't say that they're these social conscience cutting edge of everything here, because they're making a business decision. But I do think that they conveyed the value of picking a side. So.
I guess, I at least can understand Kaepernick's actions as drawing our awareness to broad societal problems, right? So it's not just isolated to, let's look at the NFL and how the NFL is run. It's not just isolated to this president saying, look, we have a real problem here. I guess what I want to start chatting about maybe a little bit is specifically what you think is reasonable or unreasonable demands in terms of the relationship between our political expectations and our love of football. For instance, Harry Potter, of all people. What's his name, actually? No, Daniel Radcliffe, right?
I had to look that up.
Yeah.
he took after Brady, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah,
so
he's mad at Brady.
Yeah, so Daniel Radcliffe, this past week at Sundance, that you're done. We're done with this question already. Yeah. But no, so he was a fan. He announced himself, said, "Look, I had been a fan, but I can continue to support Tom Brady and the Patriots until Tom Brady gets rid of that, Make America Great Again hat in his locker." So is that, I guess now I sort of want to zero on, is that the sort of thing where, is that a reasonable request? Is this, are we off the track here? I just want to throw that out.
So I'm not going to put my apologist for Tom Brady and Patriots hat on for a second here.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm totally positive. Tom Brady, yes, he's. Oh, are we being heckled? I wanted to be heckled. Yeah, that would have been cool. Tom Brady is not political. He is an old friend of Donald Trump. I mean, he I think would love that little hat to have not been there. He didn't go to the White House. He recoils from the part of the political discussion that he, through his own, I guess, carelessness, sort of wound up in the middle of. But that's sort of like a 2-year-old story in some ways. So. Tom Brady does not, and I don't know if he was asked about this during opening night of the Super Bowl this year, but I remember being at his little podium at the Super Bowl press conference last year and the year before, and him just like saying, "Please don't ask me questions about this." So I don't know if he was asked about it this year, but look, I mean, Tom I guess he has the right to be completely apolitical. Robert Kraft, Bill Belichick, I mean, for better or for worse, if you root for the Patriots, people are going to associate your team with Donald Trump. And I think to some degree, the owner, the coach, Brady, sort of had brought that on themselves. And that's one of the, frankly, unpleasant things about being a Patriots fan. You can't just say, no, they didn't deflate football, or that was a witch hunt, or that was wrong. I mean, actually, Donald Trump used the word witch hunt about Deflategate before he started using it around Russia. Little known fact.
Trial run kind of.
I don't know. He used it to me, and I quoted him, and it's a whole other story. But So anyway, no, I just look. I remember when they were playing the Falcons, which was like a couple weeks after the Trump inauguration. I mean, that game became like this proxy fight for, red America and blue America. And, for better or for worse, the Pats were Trump America. And I remember the Falcons went up 7-0, and someone tweeted, Atlanta Falcons 7, Donald Trump nothing. It's like the Patriots didn't even have an identity anymore. And then someone else tweeted something like, the Atlanta Falcons respect the independent judiciary. So it got very much in the weeds very, very quickly. So so that's what it looks like to try to escape politics into football circa 2017, 2018.
Well, there's a way, to even, use that great phrase, proxy fight, right? That's the Super Bowl last year, that it's absolutely a proxy fight. In talking, I mentioned earlier that I'm a Pats fan. My whole household is a Pats fan, even though my husband is from New York and should not be a Pats fan. But it becomes this, we had friends who are Eagles fans and who are like, no, this is greater than just football. This is something bigger than football. So I think that proxy is really important. But I'm also wondering, as a Pats fan, as someone who grew up in this area, is there room for us to critique the Pats, coming from a place of concern? Particularly around these issues, even beyond Trump, right? Deflategate, right?
I am a total Deflategate apologist. The Trump thing is harder to defend because, all right, so I will say this as a Pats fan who lives outside of New England now. they do hate us. That is legit. That's not just like they hate us. It's not this our drummed up like persecution complex. No, the hatred of the New England Patriots outside of New England is absolutely real. And it's not just, oh, well, they're jealous of us. I mean, that's part of it. But I mean, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the San Francisco 49ers, I mean, the other dynasties in the history of the NFL were not hated like this. So I think that there is some baggage that the personality of the coach, perhaps the arrogance, gracelessness of the owner, perhaps a certain unlikability in some circles of the quarterback does bring on themselves. The cheating scandals don't help. Aaron Hernandez doesn't help. I mean, there's a whole, the fan behavior in some ways doesn't help, to be perfectly frank about this. So, it is a bit of a cross to bear. I say in the book that Pats fans do lead the league in crosses to bear. But look, I was saying to someone backstage, it's just such a pleasure to watch them play football, especially like the last few weeks. That game against Kansas City was just such an intensely great sports watching experience. So, at the end of the day, the football can be really, really good, and Tom Brady is great to watch. So I'll end that on a really simplistic, innocent notion, if there is such a thing in this conversation.
At some point, I want to bring it back to the Pats.
Is that this point?
No. Okay, no. Well, not yet.
Talk about the Browns again?
No, I won't talk about
the Browns. Are ascendant.
Indeed. Mm-hmm. Indeed. I used to think that there was this weird relationship between the Pats and the Browns.
Yeah,
the Pats were diminished, the Browns were to rise, but that story, besides being absurd, doesn't really play out. Anything.
Belichick, he coached them. There was that.
It's depressing. Yeah. I want to bring it back to football and politics, right? Mm-hmm. So
that's why we're here.
Tom Brady, or we can say Tom Brady's apolitical. He got caught with Make America Great. But what interests me is the space that we seem to be in now, where you can't avoid, where in particular players can't avoid being political. For instance, there's now a lot of press about who's going to visit the White House and who's not. The Clemson thing happened, and now we're just finding out that a lot of the black players of the Clemson team were not even there at the time. I just read about this today. I just read about this today.
They missed out on some really good fast food, apparently.
There was quite a feast. Yeah. Already the Red Sox we're already seeing. This is obviously baseball, but Mookie Betts. So what is one to say, and what are your thoughts on the fact that what had been apolitical events, even when they were at the White House, if that makes any sense, let's just go and celebrate this, have now become a testament?
I was saying to someone earlier, I forget who it was, that if I were running for president, either as a Democrat or as a Republican in 2020, my first promise would be, I'm going to be a president that you don't have to think about for weeks at a time, whether you like me or hate me, whether you disagree with me or agree with me, whether you're from the other party or my party. Just there will be weeks where you just there'll be boring stuff going on because, you're right. The Red Sox win the World Series, a great feel-good thing if you're a Red Sox fan. Very likable team. First thing Alex Cora is asked, you go into the White House after, and Alex Cora, manager of the Red Sox, very outspoken about Donald Trump's Puerto Rican policy, and now the MVP of the league is not going. You see the Globe had a rundown of who's going and who's not going, and you basically have the not goings or the maybe not goings are all black or Hispanic, the white players. And so the divide, the cultural divide, the racial divide, the political divide, boom, it's this is our baseball team. The bipartisan trip to the White House, no matter whether Bush is president or Obama's president or whoever's president, Reagan's president, that's over. The Kennedy Center honors, that used to be a great sort of ceremonial thing. The president used to sit in the box, and that went away as soon as this happened. And so look, this is what happens when you have a president who is going to tweet something uncharitable about Meryl Streep. If Meryl Streep decides to, at the Oscars, say something about Donald Trump. Look, this is the world we're living in now, and the things that used to be sort of safe escape places where you can sort of feel good about entertainment or sports or whatever are no longer. So look, I hope it goes away one day, because I think it would be nice. The best thing about sports can be escape, and we don't have that now. So. But again, it does go to how the culture war has become so writ large in so many other areas of our life that we hadn't normally thought about it in.
Well, I wonder if there's a way that we can also expand this a little bit, so beyond this idea of the culture war, because it's not just the culture war that the NFL is finding itself in the midst of. It's also, the league is facing very serious problems when it comes to things like, CTE or the rate of domestic violence amongst its players. And I'm curious, just from your research, your writing, what you found is how is the league addressing this, particularly as the American public is reacting as this information is coming out and reacting very negatively to this information.
Yeah, I mean, certainly health and safety and head injuries and spinal injuries, but mostly, concussions that is existential issue one in the league. I mean, if you look at, the league, is paying more attention to this now than they were 10, 20 years ago. There's no question about it. They are trying to make some positive change, but it's pretty much at the margins. It's rule changes, it's equipment, which is not insignificant. But, the NFL is not going to be a safe game. Football is not going to be a safe game. And while, it might not be making a dent in the TV ratings or the profitability of a lot of the teams, youth participation rates are way down. And, it's true of sports across the board, because I think in many ways people are now, yesterday's sort of boyhood, sort of schoolboy girl athletes are now, they're on computer consoles all day. It's just a lot of recreation has moved indoors, so that's a part of it. But look, you don't know where the next generation of football players is going to come. And also, frankly, it's really hard for youth sports leagues and high school teams to get insurance. Insurance is a huge, huge problem for football, and schools are eliminating programs. So you do sort of wonder, where are tomorrow's football players going to come? Is it going to be an even greater bifurcated thing where we're just like, there's going to be a poorer, even poorer population where it sort of goes the way of boxing and it becomes sort of a gladiator sport in some ways. So look, that to me is an issue that, the league it's just sort of a cultural awareness. And again, the league would say that the elites on the coast are overreacting. Media executives, academics in ivory towers, they don't have an appreciation for what it's really like and the sort of benefits. If you really want to ignite a conversation, go to any football coach at these NFL coaches' breakfasts every year and just listen to NFL coaches get really defensive about the, we hate football crowd. So look, that's one. Domestic violence, it's a huge issue. It's become a huger issue now that a lot of these incidents or some of these incidents have been videotaped and have gone viral. It's sort of unclear whether there's a higher rate of domestic violence among football players than non-football players. You could debate that all day. But no, it's a terrible look. And look, the NFL unlike a political candidate, they need everybody. They need men, they need women, they need whites and blacks and Hispanic fans, they need young fans, old fans. They can't just sort of concentrate on a pretty narrow sector. So, it's not really an answer to your question, but I think the league has shown again and again an inability to deal with problems, well beyond a sort of simplistic fix. This is not a group of cultural visionaries by any stretch, or business visionaries by any stretch.
So what does the league owe its players? Besides
that's a
money
great question.
and league minimums.
Yeah. I would say that the league owes its players, first of all, if you ask the players what they feel the league should give them that they don't, it's guaranteed contracts. The NFL is the only major sports league that doesn't basically guarantee or doesn't have guaranteed contracts for virtually all of its players. I think they would say, transparency, truth. Some kind of awareness, from the medical sort of training establishment of what they're actually putting themselves through. Because look, the doctors and the trainers that can clear these players to play every Sunday work for the team. They're not earning. They're losing money for the team if the borderline maybe injured, maybe not injured linebacker isn't taking the field. So. I mean, I think there's, you could go down a long list of what they could be owed, but I think, honesty, transparency, and guaranteed contracts, if I had to guess, or if I had to say 3.
So I know we're getting to the point where we're going to want to start taking questions from you, so I'll use this opportunity to bring it back for a moment to the Patriots, right? 18 plus years of complete domination.
Not complete, but they've done well.
Yeah.
Some of those Super Bowl losses really hurt.
Yeah. The 3 out of the 8.
Yeah.
You're watching a quarterback age, which usually, ends people's careers. He's appearing again. Bill Belichick demonstrates that no matter what team you give him, including a season in which he lost Tom Brady, he can do wonders. The question that has been on a lot of people's minds, and I feel that I'm asking it so that you don't have to, is have the Patriots sold their soul to the devil?
Whoa! Didn't see that one coming.
And let me just build off of this for one second. There's a new. I just saw this before coming here, and it's just unbelievably marvelous. Like there's a new Sam Adams beer coming out this week, the Goat beer, but it's a picture of a football player with like a goat's head. That looks satanic, right? It looks like straight out of the movie The Witch or something like that. So I'm wondering if they're just embracing this. Have they sold their soul?
Wow. The answer to your question is no, they haven't sold their soul. No. Look, it's like sort of loving your children. You sort of love your team because that's what you're born with, right? I mean, everyone says that. So when I talk about this book and when I talk about football and I talk about politics, in places other than my home of New England, they mention I'm a Patriots fan, and there's immediately the hisses, the boos, and I have to be really sheepish and faux apologetic and pretend that I'm one of the good ones and not one of the obnoxious ones, and I'm gracious, and I say nice things about like Cleveland, for instance, just to sort of make them feel good about themselves. But no, look, I mean, if you're going to sort of go with a deal with the devil standard, every NFL team is in great debt to the devil, because I mean this is not a terribly attractive, in many cases, moral business. And people ask me all the time, how, given what you know about the NFL, can you keep watching football? And I give a very, very sort of I would say lame answer, which is, we have Brady and Belichick. Talk to me in a few years when they're not there anymore. Again, it's a terribly unsatisfactory answer. I realize that. But look, I mean, I reserve the right to change my mind one day because, I have learned a lot, and this is, it's in the book, but I've learned a lot about the league, about the people who run it, the people who own it. That leads me to think that it's probably not worthy of what I think is the greatness of the game itself and the greatness of a lot of the players and the commitments they make. And I mean, like, again, just watching like that AFC Championship game last weekend, it was just such a beautiful thing to watch a team come together. I mean, to me, that is the best of us. That's the best of values of teamwork and American. That sounds corny and everything, but that's where my attention keeps getting grabbed, and that's where I think the beauty and the truth is of all this.
So we're going to open it up to questions right now, and we have 4 microphones positioned around the room. We have 2 up top and 2 in the audience.
By the way, thank you everyone for coming. It's cold, and like there's people up there. It's always great when there are people up there.
So we ask that you come up to the microphone, and we just have 3 quick rules that we ask everyone to follow. The first one is all questioners should identify yourselves as you are asking your question. We ask that you ask 1 brief question per person, and then, of course, no speeches, please. Questions should end with a question mark. So why don't we start it off right here?
Hi, Louis Gadima. For 4 years in a row now, Super Bowl ratings have declined. And with CTE and insurance and all the other things that you mentioned, I'm wondering if we have passed peak football.
There was some talk that we had, but look, the ratings have skyrocketed this year, so we'll see. I mean, I think, look, the NFL has a standard of incredible, I mean, like 48 of the top 50 most watched TV shows in America last year were all NFL football games. I mean, it's insane. And so, yeah, do you, I mean, if they did hit 47 this year, is that like, are we down peak? I mean, look, they're skating at a very, very high level. So, I mean, look, I'm guessing that they will have pretty good ratings this Sunday, and we'll see where they are in 10, 20 years. But I think short term, I mean, they obviously are pleased, and a lot of these guys are old enough and rich enough so that they can afford to only think short term. So.
Okay, question up here.
Tucker Boynton. Question is, John Tomasi wrote an article for the Globe criticizing a lot of the white players on the Red Sox for not speaking up and taking a stand with the minority players who didn't go to the White House. Do you think that the white players on the Red Sox, or generally the players who maybe agree with Trump or are not so impassioned as to say that they don't want to go to the White House, do they have a responsibility to stand up for the minority players who don't want to go to the White House?
It's a good question. I think I hate this answer, but it's not for me to say because I don't know the dynamic inside the clubhouse. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if Alex Cora, the leader of the team, who's widely respected, on the team, if he said no. I mean, we'll see what the white players do. I mean, I don't know if it's that. I mean, I'm not as familiar with the dynamics of the team, but certainly, I mean, it's sort of undeniable when you see, the players who, in the NFL who didn't stand for the national anthem. I mean, overwhelmingly were African American. I mean, Chris Long, who played briefly with the Pats, plays for the Eagles now, was an exception to this. But yeah, I mean, I'm guessing that this has created a great deal of strain inside a lot of locker rooms. I know it did 2 years ago during the height of the Kaepernick sort of Trump protests. And, based on my knowledge of these teams, I mean, most of these guys don't really want to think about this, and now they have to. So again, in that sense, it's been positive in that it's sort of brought these issues to a fore, but ultimately it's been very divisive to a lot of these teams too. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not John Tomasi. I'm not going to say that they have a responsibility because, I don't know what the stakes are. I also don't know what they're going to do. So I mean, we'll see how this. I don't know how much people have really thought about this, and we'll see, what it looks like when we get closer.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, right here.
Hi, good evening. My name is Kezia, and I'm a junior at the college. Given your experience interviewing lots of politicians and people in D.C., how different were your conversations talking to either football players or the leadership in the league?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say, well, first of all, I've interviewed I've interviewed presidents and presidential candidates and celebrities and CEOs over the years, and I had never been as nervous not even close to being as nervous as when I interviewed Tom Brady. I mean, I remember, so I was in this Starbucks, back when Starbucks was just a coffee place, so not a place where you had to think about a million political, anyway, put that aside. Outside his place in New York, and I was a sweaty mess. And I was like, oh my God, what is going on here? It's like there's something about your athletic heroes that you just sort of want to just sort of hide in nostalgia and hope that they don't become human beings. You just want to you want to keep them larger than life, even though, I was 48, 49 years old at the time. Beyond that, I mean, there's a lot of nervousness. I mean, a lot of these owners, a lot of the Commissioner Goodell, I mean, they choose their words very carefully. I mean, Roger Goodell is a terrible person to interview. He never says anything. He's very controlled. He insults your intelligence. He just doesn't give you a lot, and he's as compelling in person as he is from a podium. And, in some ways, I mean, he got a lot of criticism for going into hiding after this terrible non-call in the New Orleans Rams game last week, but I do think that him being in hiding is actually preferable than him coming out in public. So yeah, but there's a lot of overlap between people. I mean, a lot of the NFL owners feel accustomed to they expect a certain deference. There was a lot more clubbiness. There was a lot more sense that you're going to take care of me, right? Robert Kraft was he knew I was a Patriots fan, so I think he expected a level of kinder treatment than he ultimately got in the book. So, I'm still a Pats fan, but I don't know if Robert Kraft is a fan of mine, which is fine. But as long as Brady likes me. I was going to email him after the season to see if he still likes me. But there's a lot of overlap. I mean, ultimately, these are people who, in politics, in sports, in business, in sort of rich, powerful people land, everyone has a story to tell, and the tension that I as a journalist have, or we as journalists have, is that we have a different story to tell. Hopefully ours more closely approximates the truth. So.
Thanks.
Sure.
Question right here.
My name is Nicholas Ausmus. I have a kind of two-part question. The first one is, the NFL puts these commercials on about how they love families and they love communities. It seems like they're widowing and orphaning kids and wives by having games on Monday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday. I wonder what you think about that. The second question is, it's bubbling below the surface. It occasionally gets written about that these guys take a tremendous amount of punishment, and the only remedy to relax their bodies is THC. And the NFL seems to have their head in the ground on that one, too. I was wondering what you think about that.
THC being
smoking pot or taking CBDs.
Yeah,
or,
sure.
Or rubbing their body down with the oil.
Yeah, okay. So two-part question. Okay. So the first part of the question, so orphaning. Yeah, I mean, too many games, too many night games, kids can't watch. I mean, that's been true in baseball for a while. I mean, I think one of the reasons baseball has sort of lost a lot of appeal among young people is that the people who run baseball have been too stupid to like have, you know, they just don't have a lot of games where kids can just watch. So, yeah, I mean, I think the upside to the league there is that they make a ton of money, you know, selling ads on Monday night, Sunday night, Thursday night, whenever else they have windows. I mean, personally, as someone who's not always free to watch, you know, whatever is on Sunday, I'm actually happy when there's a Monday night opportunity. And, you know, the Thursday night games tend to be pretty bad, but they sometimes aren't. So, I mean, many people are just pleased when there's a football game on. So, yeah, I mean, maybe there's some orphaning, but I think that there's some other reasons behind that. Marijuana, I mean, look, I don't want to sort of wade into the larger marijuana debate, but I do think that there's a lot of hypocrisy around, you know, Josh Gordon, Patriots player, you know, has some terrible addiction problems, you know, played with the Cleveland Browns, you know, his whole career, didn't play because he was suspended. You know, sometimes just for marijuana, you know, testing positive for marijuana. You know, I know a lot of players smoke a lot of retired players smoke a lot of marijuana, and they do it for relaxation, for pain management. You know, it's not dissimilar to a lot of other populations that, you know, use, you know, are having a more open-minded relationship to the drug. So, look, I don't think that there's, I mean, I don't think it should be criminalized to the degree it is inside the league. I don't think it should end the careers or you know, hurt the careers that it does. But, you know, I think that's an ongoing debate there, as you see at other places too. So.
Hi, my name is Archon Fung. I teach at the Kennedy School. A friend of mine is making this documentary in which he's kind of getting ordinary Democrats and Republicans to try to talk to one another. And one of the icebreaker questions was, what's the moment, you know, kind of in recent years where you felt the most down about America? And the Democrats, a couple of Democrats said, well, it was when Trump got elected that night. Mm-hmm. But then I was watching the Republicans, and like 2 or 3 of them said, well, it's the football kneeling thing. That's when I felt most down. And I thought, wow, you know, I knew some people were unhappy about that. The moment that's been most down about America. And so my question is, have you talked to some fans who are really upset about that? And can you help, you know, people in 02138 and this zip code understand why that would be like the most down moment for America? Yeah. I mean, it's a great question, especially in addressed to 02138, which, you know, for those of you, it's the zip code here, right? Okay, they still have zip codes, right? I mean, look, I think people saw it as a marker. People saw it as a much larger, I mean, I think not unlike what you would see in the 60s if people were, you know, growing their hair a certain length. I mean, ultimately, in the scheme of things, it wasn't that important, but symbolically, it was a huge sign that certain lines before were not going to be respected. And I think if you look at the incredible despair that a lot of people in the country felt when Donald Trump was elected, it was a belief that, like, this isn't supposed to happen. I mean, Donald Trump operates outside of a set of lines, okay? I mean, I didn't agree with Ronald Reagan, or I didn't agree with Barack Obama, but, you know, this was, the center in some ways did hold, you know, I knew what a conservative Republican president looked like. I knew what a liberal Democratic president looked like. And then there's this. And I think, you know, I think that Donald Trump's election, and I think to some degree, players, you know, not respecting, you know, the
the tradition of standing during the national anthem was emblematic of just lines of what was possible in this society, and the center, not holding, and just sort of the idea that we were in a whole different context that we'd never been before. So, I mean, that sounds like a much more abstract explanation for something that people felt very viscerally. I mean, I know a lot of people I know did. So, but no, I mean, I do think that people, especially on the coasts and in sort of 02138 America, and so much as that's a thing, underestimate at their peril the both symbolic but also the just offense that people will take to symbols of American tradition and just sort of American respect being, what looks like it could be sort of glibly kind of disregarded just in the scope of someone trying to make a statement. So again, this isn't a new idea, but I think it's something we've seen with a great deal of urgency in the last few years.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up on that? Do you also think that some of that angst about this being the lowest moment comes from those people feeling shocked or unaware or caught off guard that, in fact, these people who are majority black and brown have a very different vision of America than they do?
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, there's an incredible slow, journey to awareness for a lot of people. I mean, I think people are really dug in. I mean, you just don't. I mean, I remember this viral thing last weekend with the Covington High School kids and the Make America Great Again hat. Where this Indian, native leader was drumming. And, this was just this immediate Rorschach test, and part of it is that it played out in social media, and no one really listens to each other in social media. But you just got a sense like everyone is just talking past each other, and it's almost the sense I got when I was listening to the NFL owners talking to the sort of more socially aware players. Just, no one was listening to each other. Everyone was just convinced at the outset that what a bunch of imbeciles. I mean, he's wearing a Make America Great Again hat. I don't care if he's 16 years old. I'm not going to listen to him. I don't care about his perspective. I don't care if there's more to the story. And, they would say, this is just a bunch of grievance, identity politics, dark-skinned people. I'm not listening to them. I mean, it's just very, it becomes very reductive very, very quickly. So I think, look, I would hope that at the end of all of this, there is some kind of collective willingness to listen more closely than people do now. But look, I know us in the media, had this great reckoning about, what did we miss here? Okay, we were surprised, or certainly my newsroom was as surprised by Donald Trump's election as anyone. And it's not just that we're so much smarter than everyone else. I mean, we're missing something big here, and I think everyone sort of needs to realize that they're all missing something very, very big on a side that they don't normally listen to.
Can I jump in real quick, and then we'll I just on this point, which is, I think part of the attitude that we haven't yet explored, just to speak to, is that it's not just that folks looked at, say, Kaepernick's kneeling and said, I don't want to see that you don't agree with my vision of things. There was definitely a thread through this. It continues to be a thread, directed at LeBron, directed at Kaepernick, directed at a lot of people. You have no place speaking to these things when you are a player.
Right. Yeah.
That's a strange view, and that seems to really surface something pretty ugly. Not just I disagree with you, not just it's upsetting, but who do you think you are to use this platform to make a statement? Particularly when the complaint against Kaepernick seems a bit on the face absurd insofar as in other contexts people are like, why can't you do this peacefully? Why can't you do this respectfully? Why can't you do? Well, here's someone doing it peacefully and respectfully, and yet it's like, oh, well, that's fine, but you had no place doing it anyway.
Yeah. No, I mean, the players I got to know, in doing, one of Martellus Bennett, who played for the Patriots for a year, very thoughtful, kind of outspoken guy who's retired a couple of years ago, but he was saying, he's got this really great podcast called Revenge of the Jocks out in LA, which I was on. It was about as fun a podcast I've ever done. So everyone should listen to Martellus Bennett's Revenge of the Jocks. But he was saying that this is all part of the same dehumanization that we go through as athletes. I mean, playing football is a very dehumanizing experience, and Martellus is kind of a unique case because he didn't particularly like football, but he played it at a very high level at a very lucrative rate for 11 years. And he said, but this is the same thing. No one wants to listen to what we as human beings think or say. I mean, they just want us to shut up and dance. And that's a phrase that you hear a lot among, or in the case of, what was it, Laura Ingraham, who said "shut up and dribble," being dismissive of LeBron James. Another guy I got to know, Eric Winston, who longtime lineman for a bunch of teams, but he's now president of the NFL Players Association. He retired from playing last year, but he would always talk about just the shut up and dance ethic that they're all confronting. And look, I mean, it's offensive, and but you don't hear the voice. This has been given voice, much more so than I had been aware of. So.
Okay, over here.
Hello, my name is Eric Wilson. I'm a sophomore at the college, and I was wondering what, in your opinion, separates the NBA from the NFL in terms of handling difficult situations, specifically thinking about how the entire of the NBA handled the Donald Sterling and the Clippers situation.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting parallel. I mean, if there's one thing that drives Roger Goodell and the league and the NFL crazy, it's the unflattering comparisons they often get to the NBA. And the NBA is sort of seen as a league that kind of gets it a lot more. The commissioner, Adam Silver, is very popular. Players seem to love him. Owners really like him. I mean, he seems to have done a very good job. Now, the Donald Sterling thing, for those of you who don't know, he's the longtime sort of just awful owner of the Los Angeles Clippers, who was, I guess, a mistress taped him saying all these, racially, awful things, and that came out. I guess it was TMZ or something. It became public. And he just basically kicked him out of the league immediately. I mean, Adam Silver was in his first few months as commissioner, and it was a very popular and actually, frankly, very easy, but very kind of, it was his first big move. But no, the NBA is encouraging its players to speak up. Whenever there is a, high-profile shooting in a community, for instance, especially, a police sort of brutality case. I mean, there was one in Sacramento a few years. The league encourages its players to have some kind of team protest. There has been a great deal of, encouragement of LeBron James and Kevin Durant and Chris Paul and a lot of very high-profile players, Steph Curry, to speak up, to be, we're going to help you. We're going to help you find places to amplify your voice. And, if you run afoul of the President of the United States, we have your back. I mean, that didn't happen in the NFL. I mean, the NFL just, in addition to like a lot of the owners being Donald Trump supporters, they wanted nothing to do with taking a position here. They just, let's stick to football. And that to me is, I think, a fundamental divide between the two leagues that I think has helped the NBA in terms of goodwill, both among its ranks, but also among a lot of its fans. So, yeah.
Okay, over here.
Yeah, Josh, actually kind of an interesting follow-up to that. My thought is, you guys talked about the fact that the guaranteed contracts is one of the big things in the clarity and health. You talked about LeBron and about those type of things, and the NBA is sort of leading the way in terms of, LeBron's made a decision twice. There's sort of this player empowerment. Mm-hmm. Anthony Davis just basically is going to get to decide where he's going to go. I'm wondering, is there any chance that will trickle over to the NFL? Are we starting to maybe see that with the Kirk Cousins contract, the 3 years, $75 million, that's fully guaranteed?
Yeah.
And is that something in the NFL that can be player-led, or is that something, because it's a different league, that has to get owner buy-in for?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's worth saying that the collective bargaining agreement in the NFL doesn't expressly forbid guaranteed contracts. I mean, basically, guaranteed contracts, or the lack of them in the league, is a norm. It's something that people have just gone accustomed to not having. So the Kirk Cousins contract, which is effectively a guaranteed contract that Kirk Cousins, the quarterback for used to be Washington, now Minnesota, he's guaranteed his salary. He might be someone who is going to sort of initiate a trend towards that. But look, I mean, these players all know each other. They all talk to each other. And Steph Curry and Tom Brady are both, they know each other through Under Armour. A lot of them have the same agents. A lot of them, they work for the same, athletes today, especially high-profile, successful athletes, have large entities that they work for. I mean, you could have 12 different, organizations that pay your salary that you have some kind of infrastructure with. So, yeah, I mean, I think, look, players pay attention more than you think. I think social media has been a democratizer in this way. It's certainly enabled people to be more outspoken, sometimes to their detriment, than they were before. So, yeah, I mean, I think that there probably is some, there is going to be some overlap between the two leagues. And I think that based on a lot of the NFL people who talk about the NBA, it's a league that they would like to be able to learn from. But unfortunately, unless the owners and the commissioner are willing to learn from, model organizations, it's not going to really happen that fast.
So we have time for one more question, and goes to you.
Oh.
Huh?
Thank
no
you.
Pressure.
No pressure. Good evening. I'm Jamie Lockhart. I'm a mid-career MPA student here at the Kennedy School, where the motto is ask what you can do. And I'm curious what power you think fans have in all of this to change the culture of the NFL, and what opportunity, other than a mass boycott or season ticket holders kind of revolting, what it would take fans to do for owners to listen and take action.
I mean, in a way, you answered your own question, right? This is the owners, the league will talk about the vindication they get year in and year out, week in and week out, by the marketplace, by the demand, by the ratings, and so forth. And look, I'm not going to call for a fan boycott in any way, shape, or form, but I think the fact that the NFL has generated so much bad will in certain circles of the American culture around political issues, around management incompetence, around just botching, some very, very serious and important issues. You have probably about 7 or 8 markets that is absolutely hostile to the National Football League that Roger Goodell could not go into the middle of without extra security. Whether it's Oakland or now New Orleans, he needed, New Orleans, he's not the most popular guy in New England, San Diego, St. Louis. He's just a lot of people across the country have a lot of bad will. And look, I'm not, again, this is not a hill I personally am dying on, but I made the determination a couple of years ago that I'm not going to give the NFL any of my money. I used to do the Sunday ticket thing so I could watch any game, and it cost a couple $100 a year, and I just stopped doing that. Now, I'm not putting myself out there as this great, social activist here, and besides the Pats, who I like to watch, are usually on free TV in DC, so I don't have to pay for it, so there is that. But look, it is a pocketbook issue, and the only thing that the league really will pay attention to is bottom lines. And look, the Washington Redskins, this is where I live, have become a major problem for the National Football League. When I first moved to Washington 20 years ago, this was the marquee franchise, not just in the league, or one of the marquee franchises in the league, but certainly in Washington. It was king. And now they had something like a 75% capacity rate. They had one of the lowest attendance rates in the league. They've been surpassed by the Washington Nationals, Washington Capitals. Well-run local sports enterprises. And look, the fact that the nation's capital football team has become an embarrassment with a just despised owner within Washington and within the league is a big problem for the league in terms of goodwill. So I guess as fans, you can just express your bad will in responsible ways, and if that includes spending your money a certain way, I think that can be very effective. So.
All right, so this concludes our event and our panel for this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you all
Thanks
for coming. And thank you so much to Mark and to Chris for co-moderating this event. And thank you so much for coming out into the Institute of Politics and the Forum for hosting us. So thank you and good night.
Good night.
Thanks. Good.